All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Scott Kosnoff with Faegre Baker Daniels. I'm your MC for this session. And if you're here to hear about venture capital, you're in the right room. Our moderator is Nick Gerhardt, who joined FBL Financial Group as Chief Administrative Officer in January of 2017. Before then, he served nearly 4 glorious years as insurance commissioner.
Yes.
Was it 4?
Glorious.
It was glorious.
That's a great
For the state of Iowa. But before then, my colleagues and I knew him as the Oracle because he had this penchant for making bold predictions about the future, and he was almost always right. Nick, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Scott. It's good to see you again. And again, I want to thank the panelists. I'll introduce them by name and let them kind of talk about their fund and what they're working on. So, Kat Udick, thank you. Mike Bechtel and Dave Miles at the end. But I want to give a kind of real high overview and then turn it over to each of them to kind of talk about their fund and what they're working on. And then we'll have some Q&A with myself and then hopefully with you all. Really what I want to do today is just kind of level set what's going on in the investment ecosystem for InsurTech. With a lot of these companies are trying to reimagine the design of insurance. You know, since 2012, about $8 billion has been invested in some of these startup companies. So it's actually becoming a real ecosystem, I would argue. And each of these individuals has a part in it with different kind of funds at different stages in their own development too. So we're hoping to have a robust discussion. If something comes to mind that you want to ask, you know, write it down at the end. We'll hopefully have 5-10 minutes for a couple questions at least. So Kat, why don't you introduce yourself and your fund?
Awesome, thanks. And happy to be in Des Moines, my first time here, and I've been really enjoying it. So I run Core Innovation Capital, which is a early stage San Francisco-based financial technology venture capital firm. We invest exclusively in what we say are empowering financial services. So fintech companies that are making people or businesses either upwardly mobile or that help cut costs out of their lives. As part of our fintech thesis, we're investing in insurance. We have about a dozen different investments along health, life, and P&C. Very typical for us to write about a $5 million check, get 10 to 20% ownership, sit on the boards, and help the companies grow. We normally invest when they have sub $1 million in revenue, and fortunately a bunch of our companies have several $100 million of revenue now, so they grow pretty quickly.
Great. Hey everybody, my name is Mike Bechtel. I'm coming off of a case of laryngitis, so if this smoky voice sounds interesting, let me know and I'll adopt it permanently. I'm the managing partner of Ringleader Ventures, a Chicago-based venture capital firm we co-founded in 2013. Our thesis is a little bit different than Kat's in that we partner with legacy companies, for example, in the insurance space, to figure out where you feel stuck and or otherwise threatened by the future. And then we take that list of gripes and use it as a treasure map to find startups who have wittingly or unwittingly solved for some of those problems. What's interesting and different, I've been told in our model, is that we tend to look everywhere but #InsurTech. We think the next great insurance startup might currently think they're an AI startup or a retail startup or a healthcare startup. And so by getting David and Goliath together in unexpected ways, we create arbitrage opportunities and a shot for some real value. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
My name is Dave Miles. I'm managing partner of Manchester Story Group, which is a local firm, and we are focused on early stage investment in insurance-related innovation. And as we were sitting down, we were just commenting on how appropriate it is that we're sitting in airplane seats, because that's what we spend a lot of time doing, sitting in airplane seats. We are, as I mentioned, early stage, so we're typically Series A, Series Seed. We're going to write $1.5 million, $2.5 to $3 million checks typically. We are often lead at that stage. We prefer companies that have a product and they have a handful of customers, although sometimes we'll go a little bit earlier. One of the things, it sounds like all three of us take a little bit different approach, certainly to investments, but also to how we've put together our investors. So we are backed by 9 insurance carriers, as well as a number of non-strategic investors as well. But we think we get a real investment edge from those 9 insurance carriers that back us because we can run ideas by them. They often will come to us with what are their pain points, what are the things that are really concerning them. And it also can help accelerate the process for the startups that we work with to get introductions and to be able to exchange ideas with those companies.
Good. Well, thank you for those introductions. First question for the group is, I hear a lot of VC folks talk about product market fit. I also hear, excuse me, a lot of people talk about, I bet on the founder as much as anything. Where do you all fit when you evaluate a potential investment? Is it product market fit? Is it the founder? Is it something else?
Yeah, early stage, definitely the founder. I need you, like, as you said, they said you're the oracle and you know what's happening. You should be a venture capitalist.
I know.
But a lot of...
I see a lot of my farm bureau people. Don't get any ideas. I'm not.
But in very early stage, when there is no data and sometimes there's no product, you really have to bet on the team and that they're the right people to grow it. They're going after, we always ask them, what's their background and what's the genesis of the idea. And these are the right people to go after the right idea, because you also have very smart people that sometimes go after the wrong thing. So really care about the team. Always care about the team even later stage when there is post-product, post-market, but there you have some more data, and then you can say, okay, like if there is that much traction, like fortunately we can be wrong all the time. In this business, you just have to be right some of the time and you make a lot of money. And so if there's data and you say, oh God, I missed this in the seed, I was clearly wrong, but like there is a product market fit, then we'll reconsider, but still has to be great founders that can scale.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree that the earlier you get, the more the people matter. Mm-hmm. I was at a conference in Chicago at the Union League Club, and our current governor, then notable private equity superstar Bruce Rauner, he had given a keynote, and then he said, okay, we have a private equity track and a VC track for the breakouts. And there was this gaggle of MBA students there. You could tell because they were all dressed to the nines in their black suits. And they looked a little clueless. Which way do they go? And Governor Rauner leaned back to the mic. He said, for those of you who want to analyze spreadsheets for a living, go to the PE breakouts. For those of you who want to analyze people for a living, go to the VC breakouts. And I think to Kat's point, that's it. We like to say at Ringleader, beauty's in the eye of the business model. And what we mean by that is there's no such thing as the straight out of central casting archetype founder. Mm-hmm. Rather, you need to be the right founder for your business. So if you're the nebbish analytic, you're probably the right guy or gal to run that nebbishy analytic startup. I don't want to see that same founder creating the rope skipping app to get into the club, because I'm not sure that's their superpower, right?
I agree with everything that Kat and Mike have said. The only thing I would add is I don't view it as a choice. You have to hit on all of the cylinders, but at early stage, you're going to be wrong about market, you're going to be wrong about product, something in there, and the team is what matters. And if you pull the team out at that early stage, or a key member of the team because they're just not the right fit, the likelihood of succeeding is very low. I'm reminded about a year ago we took a really hard look at a really interesting company, great group of founders, super backgrounds. They were in the Valley, and they had a workers' comp idea, and it was around hardware, and it was really quite intriguing. But it was too early, too unproven. We didn't invest in it, and so I ran into them here not very many weeks ago, and everything had changed about what they were doing except the people involved. And so that's the way it goes at that early stage. And you have to have folks that it's an odd combination. They have to believe fiercely in what they're doing. But they also have to recognize when the market is telling them that what they fiercely believed in doesn't work.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
If I might maybe ask you a question, Dave, or share a bit of a comment on that.
Yeah.
Dr. Kira talked about that this morning, that you shouldn't fall in love with your product, but rather your customers. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, were they still chasing down the same problem or market need after their pivot, or did they even change that too?
No, it's a good question, because when I said everything changed, that's really probably one step further than I should have gone, because they were still pursuing the same problem.
Right on.
Right, yeah. But in a completely different way.
Right, and I think that's what I've seen, Nick and Kat too, is that one of the things we look at beyond team, probably 1 and 1A. 1A is, are they chasing down a problem worth solving?
Right.
Yeah.
Because odds are the product's going to change 9 times till Tuesday. But if it's still in service of a big, meaty problem worth solving,
Right.
then you're still coherent in 3 years.
Yep, absolutely, good point. So, Dave, this question's for you. A lot of insurance companies themselves have set up their own venture funds, if you will, and I know yours is a kind of a pool of a number of insurance carriers.
Right.
And you talked about this being strategic, but do you think it's more strategic or defensive plays, or are they looking for, you know, outside earnings? What is the play for your LPs?
You know, it varies. One of the things that we tell them when we first discuss the potential to be a part of this consortium of insurance carriers is that we will give them a window into the world of innovation, and you know, we're not going to invest in the vast majority of things that we see, but we'll give them exposure to that. And I think some of them do it because they have a very clear thesis or set of theses about things that they're interested in. Some just do it for the exposure. And I think some are doing it defensively. And we get into a rhythm with each one of the carriers about how we communicate back and forth. And interestingly, I don't find it discouraging, but I have heard more times than I'd like, you know, we'd like to have a return, but it's really all about strategic. And that's okay, except we are absolutely committed first and foremost to return. And we think it's the only way we build a sustainable model is to be competitive with the returns that Kat and Mike are producing and everybody else that's in the business. So when they brush aside the return is not that important, we do not let that affect our decision making.
That's probably a good thing for you, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of our LPs is actually a strategic insurance company, and they publicly announce it. It's Allianz. And when they were setting up their own ventures group, the reason they invested in our fund first is so we could help them set up their group and help them like figure out how the fund should look. And they wanted more strategic and not returns. And we said, well, we'll see everything, right? So we'll see 1,000 new deals this year and do 4 big ones and 4 small ones. So you'll be able to see the innovation. And then we'll tell them when it's like, hey, this isn't for us because it won't hit our, if we can't underwrite to 10xing our money, we won't do it. But this might be strategic for you. So they're doing a bunch of like the deals that they're doing some of the deals that we would reject for returns reasons, but that are really strategic. And so that kind of like symbiotic partnership works pretty well.
Yeah.
So you just said 1,000 deals. How do you source your deals? Walk us through that.
Yeah, so they come from a lot of different places now. So we started doing fintech before fintech was cool. Forget about now that it's hot. And so my partner helped start something called the Center for Financial Services Innovation in 2004. And so we know a lot of people in the ecosystem. We always say there's only 5,000 people in the world that need to know us, and we know most of those people. So it comes from a lot of our portfolio company CEOs, it comes from our investors, it comes from other entrepreneurs that we know in the community, a lot of co-investors. So especially at the seed stage, we syndicate Series A, we usually lead, but we'll bring in a bunch of other co-investors. There's like a later stage firms that really want, they want to see our early stage and they'll say, hey, this is too early for us. Do you guys want to look at it? So we get involved from a lot of different ways where what's normally never successful is, I think actually never in the 30-something deals we've done is from an investment banker or a service provider, that deal flow is usually not good because an entrepreneur should be able to figure out how to get to me, especially if they're in, this is a very small ecosystem. If they can't get to me, how are they going to get to a customer?
Yeah.
So
Good point.
That's well said.
Yeah.
No, you're right. It's a high-pass filter
Yeah.
for sure. In looking at our deal flow, so because our model, with respect to traditional high-performing VCs that take a portfolio approach and pardon the pejorative language, but the sort of spray and pray model where you put 100 investments out and you only need 2 to hit. Our model sort of eschews spray and pray with lead with need, right? And because of that, what we find is that our deal flow is less about elbows out competing to get into the hot deals and more about creatively looking under rocks and mushrooms for these overlooked, undervalued oftentimes flyover state startups. Some of you are familiar with Steve Case, former AOL, and his Rise of the Rest campaign. We ascribe to that same, thesis. The way we source the deals, we actually we maintain a group of, at any given time, 5 to 15 undergraduates. Interestingly, they're typically college sophomores and juniors, and we also have interns that are between their sophomore and junior year. And here's the deal. They work 4 hours a week from their home campus for $15 an hour. We say better than beer money, less than Deloitte. And
Beer costs a lot more these days.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Yeah, and maybe
Busch Light beer, exactly.
You know what? I'm feeling generous, 16. But the idea is they get to put venture capital on their resume. They get 4 great months. They have 2 jobs: look in their university and look in their geography for great deals that satisfy our treasure maps that we give them from the corporates. And probably the best part of that model for us has been we don't have to sweat the career model challenge in VC, which is typically there's an employee career path problem of how do I make it to partner. By eschewing the principle and having this band of crowdsourced young folks, they get what they need, and we get an evergreen source of eyes, ears, and brains.
Do you think that young people are good at finding fintech companies? Like, I could see them finding the next Snapchat, but like our CEOs tend to be on average, I think that we did it like 45 years old, which wouldn't be typical if it was like a social media type thing. So can they get to those guys?
What we find is that we use those folks as sort of the line one radar, because in our model there's this moment, 3,000 diligence exercises in, where that young person finds a company whose website suggests they've scratched some percentage of one of our itches. Mm-hmm. The young person will reach out, make first contact. If the entrepreneur shoos them away, then just like you said, we've done an early screen of they're not terribly collaborative or open-minded. Mm-hmm. If they take that meeting, then they quickly escalate to our full-time staff, at which point we do what we need to do to suss out signal from noise.
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking about the way you're approaching it, and I find it really interesting. I don't know that our approach is going to be that much different. We certainly don't have that model, which I like. We have relationships that have built up over the years. You have successful entrepreneurs, you have board members of successful companies. So we invest across the United States. We haven't, we're first-time fund, first-year fund, and in that first year, we did 5 deals. We haven't done any in the Valley. They've all been outside the Valley, which we're not allergic to doing deals there, but we think we've got a better network outside right now. So we work the network, but I also think the emergence of the Global Insurance Accelerator and Plug and Play and SVIA and Hartford and there's all sorts of there are all sorts of routes today that just a few years ago didn't necessarily exist, and we work really hard proactively to generate deal flow from those sources as well. So we're not passive waiting for things to come in.
And us too, we'll be very thesis driven, so we'll find people before they find us too, and we go really deep. And I'm assuming you know what problems your insurance companies want to solve. Yeah.
So Dave, this next round, I'll start with you and then work back this way. I've probably talked to 200 or 300 founders or startups in the last 5 years. I know you have as well. Some of these folks can barely spell insurance when you first talk to them. No offense, I couldn't spell insurance when I got in the business either. But how do you look at that when there's a technical business they're trying to sell into? How do you see the role of advisors? How do you test their knowledge and ability to scale in a technical business?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because insurance does have its own knowledge, and you need to have some understanding about that. And yet you don't want to be trapped by traditional thinking in insurance. So we like entrepreneurs that have good, strong technological backgrounds. I mean, we have our own investment theses, but it all starts with a notion that there's a long runway yet in the digitalization of our economy. and particularly insurance. I think fintech, broadly written, and you get into, payments and lending is so far ahead, I think, of where insurance is. So that'd be the broad theme, and then we think insurance, and I can go into our theses around insurance. But so we look for teams that have a balance of skill sets, and we want some insurance, but the way that we go about testing the ideas is through our own team members, but also a group of advisors that are very helpful to us, and we have advisors with different skill sets depending on where in the value chain or what type of insurance. And then again, back to, we call them our strategic partners. These are the limited partners that are the insurance carriers, and go directly to them, directly to the business units to see whether it solves a business case. And we also get information back, from them that will say, if you can find someone who can address this, this is a big issue for us.
In our model, we limit our knitting, or we stick to the knitting of typically software startups. Why? Because imbued in our model is this idea of, we love what you're doing in industry X, have you considered insurance? And you can imagine, after that filter of no, sounds boring, okay, you're not for us. Or no, sounds complicated, okay, you're not for us. If they were, a medical device company, to pivot something to be relevant to insurance is a capital-intensive slog. To update form fields in a perfectly good real estate app and change the word, customer to insured, that's an easier global find and replace, right? And so by sticking to software companies, we can avoid some of the muck that comes with understanding technical and regulatory and insurance. I think beyond that, we take a policy of advise, not direct. So whereas Kat's writing bigger checks, taking a board seat, and steering their startups into the future, we come in as a guide on the side, a board observer, an influencer who gives them just enough insurance mojo to be relevant and compliant.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, insurance is highly regulated, state by state. So our teams normally have a background or have spent at least a couple of years understanding what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. I think the good thing about this being such a highly regulated industry is if you know what you're doing, it's almost regulatory arbitrage that you can, is like a huge business model. So for us, we take people that really understand the regulations, because the problem with, not the problem, what's both a blessing and a curse about entrepreneurs is that they do move fast and they can hack a lot, but we want them to realize, like, this is not the taxi industry or the hotel lobby. Like, you cannot break insurance regulation, you cannot break financial services regulation. So we normally have people that are deep into it.
So I'm going to go off script a little bit. So Zenefits comes to mind. We talk about someone who veered a little off. How would you, if you were one of the investors in that situation, what would you have done?
Well, we weren't an investor in that situation, and I think, like, if you knew the team and where they were, so when we do diligence, we can test this about, like, how serious what they're gonna hack and what they're not. And we take a very zero tolerance policy. You can't hack regulations. So we wouldn't have gotten in that position, and they did need a new team. If we were in a company that we thought they were going to do the right thing and then veered off path, I mean, we sit on the board, and, like, we would, if it was something that was blatant against the rules, we would remove whatever team, whether it's the CEO, the COO, unless it was something that they were going to work and we'd fix right away. But we'd nip it in the bud. There's, like, no tolerance there.
Good answer.
Yeah.
All right.
What Kat said.
Exactly, that's a good answer.
Yeah. Are you still a commissioner?
No.
Here.
Once a commissioner.
Exactly. I
always-
see a lot of regulators in the room, so that was a great answer. We've seen investments kind of spike, and then there was a year where they went back a little bit, and they went back up a little bit last year. Where do you see investments in this space going in the next couple of years? Increasing or leveling off or decreasing?
So there's a trend line for for any opinion here. It's frothy out there. The startup market is hot, and has, 2 years ago, I was here at GIS, and there was a feeling that we'd reached the peak of some sort of a, you're not supposed to say the word, right? Bubble. And then here we are 2 years later, and it's warmer still. I believe macroeconomically, there's energy left in this run, and significant. I think it's going to get warmer before it gets cooler, macro level for the startup world. But even beyond InsurTech or insurance, I just think that, and Dr. Kira talked about this morning, there's this structural change happening, right, where there are fewer and fewer big companies, and there are more and more little companies. That's a macro trend that's not cyclical. That's a change to the nature of work on the planet. And if you buy that and look at it, the average tenure of a company on the S&P 500 is shrinking, and it's currently down to 7 years, And then on the flip side, Facebook raises $1 billion in 7 years, Uber in 5, and then Telegram, if you're into crypto, they did an ICO for $1 billion in 3 months.
ICO, that's a whole new panel, so we're not going to go.
That's a whole deal. But I guess the point is, to quote my grandma, God bless her, she always would tell me, Mike, it's hell to get old. And that was her way of saying, well, it's heck to get old. But I think it's hard to be an incumbent because the structural forces are against you. And so I think there's a lot left in this. I think investments are going to go up.
I guess I'd like to, you talked about Facebook. We hear about Facebook, Amazon, Google, the big tech players. How do you see these smaller players in that ecosystem? Do you think, like these other bigger ones absorb those? Or do you see insurance carriers absorbing these startups? Where do you think that happens in that ecosystem? I don't see Facebook, Google, Amazon ceding a lot of ground if they feel like they should be there.
Yeah, I mean, you're watching them buy a decent amount of startups. I think it's going to be interesting to see what they do in the insurance space, and I think it's really interesting what was Amazon and the other two companies that came and trying to become their own health insurer in the health insurance space. So I think some of the problem is just talent. Can these people attract the right talent? So it's a lot easier to buy a startup than to hire some of these more entrepreneurial people that normally wouldn't work with your bigger company. And so when you acquire a startup, you can pay people a ridiculous amount, or they have earnouts for a couple of years. So I think, if you're Amazon, you want to go into something, you try to find a right team doing something in that space, buy it and offer them enough money where they'll be there for a couple of years and help you build it. I mean, for us on the venture side, I'm happy all day long for these big companies to come and one of our companies was bought by PayPal, one by TransUnion. It's been great exits for us. I like all day long they can buy them.
Yeah. No, I mean, amen to that. I mean, our first exit was to LinkedIn. And it's interesting because, despite our thesis being, as I said, big insurer, little unexpected, future InsurTech, LinkedIn swooped in as the acquisitive entity and bought the startup, and we were thrilled, right? You know what? I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if some of those FANG companies, Facebook, Amazon, maybe probably not Netflix, but Google, right? Tencent, Alibaba. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if 5 years we see those folks buddying up with whales in the insurance industry. Remember AOL Time Warner 10, 15 years ago? That felt so weird. Like TV and internet, that's unthinkable. And it turned out to be a pretty bad deal. But the point being, here were two unrelated industry titans that saw synergies, and they went strong to the hoop. I wouldn't be surprised, to Kat's point, the InsurTechs are going to go where they go, and that David and Goliath stuff is just going to happen, period. But I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a big insurance carrier buddy up with Google and blow our minds with a massive joint venture or who knows, even merger one day.
Well, potential investment in Swiss Re has been in the paper, so I think that could be happening quicker than than we know. A lot of these, I think a lot of the startups there's been discussion about fintech and how does InsurTech relate in terms of, is it going to disrupt the industry, or is it going to facilitate and partner or collaborate with incumbents? And a lot of what we're seeing, I think, are businesses that are focused on helping incumbents in some way do what they're doing better, taking friction out, lowering expenses. And so they're going to follow one path, but then there is a small but really interesting set of companies that I think will reshape the industry, and they will put themselves in a position to either become much larger themselves, or they'll be an attractive candidate for a large, whether it's a tech company, a large insurer, or some combination of the two, as they start to really remake parts of the value chain.
You know, when I was commissioner, I hated the word disruption in insurance because that always meant someone got hurt, and usually you're taking a company over. But you kind of walked into that. Where did you see an Uber of insurance? I mean, you kind of touched on that, but I've read a lot about people saying, hey, there's going to be an Uber of insurance, and the incumbent carriers are going to go to the wayside. I don't really buy into that, but where do you stand on that?
Well, you know, the first and obvious difference is the need for a balance sheet. Insurance carriers are capital intensive. And VC tends not to want to be capital intensive. It's very difficult to generate the kind of returns if you're not in some sort of a capital light kind of structure. So that's one of the reasons you're seeing far fewer carriers being established than companies that, again, they might disintermediate parts of the value chain, but at the end of the day, they're working with carriers. And I think that's, to me, that is much more likely. You know, it seems some days every third company I meet with is going to be an MGA, and then once they've mastered that, which apparently is a small step, as you hear it described, once they've mastered that, then on to become a carrier. And they'll worry about getting the balance sheet later, but at some point they plan to do that. I think those plans are unlikely to come to fruition in most instances. But again, to turn an industry, I mean, how many Ubers were required to really, change that whole transportation industry? So I don't rule that out as a possibility at all. I just think it's not going to be it's not a path as a venture capitalist that I'm going to expect to materialize very often.
I'm not sure. So especially a couple of years ago, we would joke, everyone come in, they go, we're going to do MGA, and then we're going to become a carrier, and it's like their plan in 2 years. I'm like, that's impressive. So we saw a bunch of that. We've seen that go down a bit, thankfully. I mean, you do see some venture capitalists, if you have a big fund, right? You see Oscar, you see Clover, you see a couple people that have established like full stack carriers. What is interesting, and dare I even mention the word blockchain, but like, because you can do these ICOs to a point, we think there's a way to register them as a security. You can actually take some non-dilutive capital. So we're backing a company that's in stealth mode that I can't talk too much about, that will be able to do, I think, this more like Uber for insurance model. And as a VC, I can put in my normal check at the ownership I want and leverage this raise. Again, we're completely regulatory compliant. It will be registered as a security. It will be accredited investors. There will be like governance on the amount of people. So we spent a lot of time on it. But this is the first time, I've seen it where you actually could have that non-dilutive capital in a different structure. We could go into detail of like what the coin would be and how it would work in insurance thing, but it's probably one of the most fascinating ideas I've seen, and I have a feeling that we'll see a lot more of that over the next couple of years. So then if the insurance people can please talk to the SEC and the CFTC, we can all work out the regulatory
good luck with that. Last question before we turn over to the audience, kind of a fun one. Talk about your best and your worst investment. It could be insurance or anything else.
Oh, yeah, you asked us about that
Exactly.
before. I almost forgot. So my best and worst investment, I mean, I've had, I'm not going to tell you how many zeros I've had, so we could count any of those as worst. But in some ways, my best and worst investment was the first investment I ever made, which happened to be in a public equity. I think I was out of college, but not very far out of college. And it was a company that had a bunch of asbestos claims, and I fancied myself a, Ben Graham value investor.
And you're a lawyer. You went to law school too, right? So that should have been.
Yeah, but they were, they were reserved, multiple times what was needed, and so I thought, that's just been beaten down, and so I put some small amount, but a big amount for me at the time, into the stock, and within like 6 weeks they had to restate, and they were just blown up. I mean, the asbestos claims overwhelmed them far more than they had reserved for. Fortunately, I only lost about half of my money and got out immediately. So it was worse because it was like the first investment I'd ever made. It was best because I found that I didn't want to throw myself from a building. The fact that I had, I found out that it didn't kill me. That it was okay. I learned something from it. So that's my story.
Yeah, you can only lose as much as you put in.
That's right. Unless you short it, and then you can lose an infinite amount.
That's right. Wait, your fund does margin call?
Yeah, we don't do that. No.
I guess if you look beyond ringleader and just to straight up individual stuff, on a dare from a super nerdy friend in 2012. I bought a Bitcoin. And
Just one, huh?
Yeah, just one.
Okay.
And it was more of a science experiment because I'd heard people yammering on about it, and I wanted to check out and see how this works. And in 3 months, it had gone up by something bonkers, like 15x. And we're talking small money that turned into medium money, right? No big deal. But I thought, this is awesome. I'm going to buy another one. And so I bought another one, and I used, for any of you familiar with the space, there's this notion of a wallet or an exchange, and it was something called Mt. Gox.
Oh, yeah.
we just separated the people who know the story, I think, from those who don't. Well, I woke up one Tuesday. I was literally about to put up a braggy Facebook post about how this had gone up again, except the wallet wouldn't load. And it was gone. And it was literally gone. And I thought to myself, easy come, easy go.
Yep.
And as technically and philosophically compelling as cryptocurrency and blockchain continues to be, I've had the visceral experience with, ether, no pun intended.
Yeah.
Within the VC front, I'd say our best was our first exit. You never forget your first. And solving an insurance industry need, in this case, brokers' inability to look like a digital native, with a real estate app that made them look much more savvy online. Getting a great multiple on that in 10 short months proved to me that there was merit in our model. And like Dave, my worst, which one of the zeros do you want to hear? As Brian Hemeseth, who many of you know, said 2 years ago at GIS, startups are in a literal race against insolvency. Literal. When you postpone a meeting with a startup, you are meeting a different company the next month.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's well said.
And so regardless of how smart you are in doing this, they can go to zero. And my first venture investment went to zero. That hurt.
And I always feel like you're only like one day away from it being your best or your worst investment.
Right.
This is why it's like really hard, because I don't even want to call it. There's a couple things we're very well known for, but who knows, right? The world can change tomorrow, and that's the thing about venture is things look really great at certain points, and you're like, oh, this is amazing, and then the next day something happens, and it's not. And then there's some that I would have sworn they'd be dead, and then somehow they like rise again. And they just like keep going, and that's why grit and persistence is amazing. So again, it depends on the day. What is the best, and what is the worst?
Yeah.
Good. I think we have time for a couple of questions. If anybody has one, raise your hand. Otherwise, lunch is after this.
I've got it.
Okay, in the back.
You mentioned the word blockchain. Insurance, any sector is driven by process is insurance. So it would seem that blockchain is both a logical, holy grail of innovation, as well as a threat to many innovators. So I was just curious, as venture capitalists, do you have your own internal guidelines? What's that? Thank you. Thank you. X percentage of your goals, your capital go towards blockchain technology,
back there, yeah.
and the rest not?
Go back.
So on the blockchain, I don't think it's a holy grail. There's a lot of, yes, process matters. There's a lot of things that can be done with like simple databases, other ledgers. I think people talk about this like amorphous decentralization, how great that is. A lot of the things on the blockchain aren't truly decentralized, and there is a reason why you should have trust in third parties. So I'm not sure of making like a trustless system is the best way. I know Nick, I trust Nick, and so that can help. And if I talk to Mike and Dave about Nick, that's good. Do we need it some kind of decentralized way, in some complicated way? No, we don't. So this goes back to actually what Mike was saying is investing in people that are actually going to solve real problems. I think there are some, but very far and few between, legitimate uses from blockchain. And as we watch our deal flow change, right, 70% of every startup coming in my office now has something on the blockchain.
Yeah.
And you can usually ask, like, why do you need a blockchain? Why does this make sense? And you can break it. And if they have a coin, you can normally like break their coin. And there's such a better way to do it. And it's like sometimes solutions looking for problems that don't exist. So there are some where I think it's really good, but I think there's a whole lot that are either just bad ideas, fraud, or issuing regulation.
I've kind of seen it move, to your point, Kat. We've all seen the Gartner hype cycle, right? Or the Dunning-Kruger curve, whatever you want to call it. But I'm seeing blockchain start to move from being the title slide to slide 7, right? So, and what I mean by that is it's not a blockchain startup that's pitching me anymore. Now it's I had a guy and a gal in last week. They're looking to sort of disrupt management consultancies by saying that we can build a proven record of who's better at predicting the future than the next guy. So basically, like, how good are you at being a strategist? We can now prove it. And it wasn't until slide 7 they said, oh yeah, and the way we prove it involves blockchain. And I thought, okay, to Kat's point, real opportunity, clever solution, powered by the right back end. It's the engine, not the chassis.
We're going to enter Nick in that competition.
Exactly.
He's good at predicting.
And I like blockchain. Any other, go ahead. Can we get a microphone back there?
So you mentioned that VC is very much about reading people, and I want to see is there a different way to read people that are based out of the Valley or New York versus maybe these kind of flyover states or anything like that?
Well, Kat's uniquely positioned because she's both New Yorker and Bay Area. So
Yeah, I live both places, and we invest everywhere in the U.S. Though I think it's like 70% of our companies are a 10-minute walk from our office in San Francisco, but we invest everywhere. No, I think, you normally have a good sense when you're with someone and you have this, they tell you their whole backstory, even from where they started growing up into like why they're doing what they're doing. And it doesn't matter where people are from, you can really normally tell the genuineness of that. When they're sitting with their team, and we'll always do we'll go to people's offices, we'll see them with their team. If Nick and I have a problem, you can tell that I'm like rolling my eyes at him or something. And so it's not just like reading a person, it's reading the whole team. The other thing that we do, and because this is such a small ecosystem, I can reference people really easily. So I'll know, I probably have 100 people in common. So if I didn't know Nick, all right, I think he's a good guy. Well, I'll talk to the 20 people that have worked with him, right? One person might have something bad to say, but normally you'll have a consistent story. So we normally have a gut, and it doesn't, it's where you have to check it is if someone's really charismatic, it's a lot easier to be like, oh, this is great, versus if it might be like a slightly Asperger's, CTO type person that's talking to you. You're like, wait, is he really off or whatever? But the more you have a conversation, go deep, and the more you reference him, you can, I think it doesn't matter where the person's from, what country, you start trying to figure out where your biases are versus what people look like, if they have accents or not. You become very well aware of where you might be biased and why you think someone's good or not. And so I like to think we've gotten rid of a lot of it, and then we we check our gut to see if we're wrong or not. And then again, we learn and learn because we see what happens when we invest in these companies and we sit in the boards. And then there will be certain key characteristics that I'm like, oh, I should have seen that in hindsight. So you get better and better. It's not perfect, but
Back testing.
yeah.
Anything to add there? No? All right. Any more questions? No? All right, I don't see any. So let's, oh, go ahead. Get him a mic.
I'm just curious. So, Nick, could you ask the audience to how many people here are involved in blockchain in one way, shape, form, or fashion?
Okay.
Or
So-
doing something, or working with it, or interested?
Well, no, you are, so yeah, let's get a question. How many people are involved in blockchain, whether in your company or side investments, or let's say you raise a hand. Okay. Okay. Not a bad number, yeah. Good. Any other questions? Well, let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, Mike.
That's fun.
Enjoyed it, yeah.